Okay. So as I was saying, we just a reminder of kind of why we're all here is that earlier in the year, the CDA made the decision to contract with Mark Roffers, who's the planning consultant for the village, to do a redevelopment project planning because we had the 1994 pretty much was the last one that we did, and time to update it. And with the support of the village, we contracted with Mark. And so we're excited to get going. And so this is kind of the agenda, the first meeting of the technical advisory team. And this is the agenda, which is basically taken from that one pager or two pager that I sent out with the milestones. And so Mark, I'm going to stop sharing and just let you take it away if that's okay for everybody.
Sure. Well, it's okay with me.
Okay.
Good.
Got it.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Michelle knows this, but I've been having internet trouble this morning. I'm now 3 feet away from my wireless, so hopefully it won't cause a problem, but it causes me to be in my daughter's bedroom. But the good news is she's not here. And that's very good news. I love her, but you know what I mean. So anyway, the first thing I wanted to share was the schedule. Let me just make sure I pop that up. So this is our first technical advisory team meeting, and I think how this is going to go is that we'll kind of vet ideas here in a smaller group before we share them with the CDA. So I think meeting, a week in advance of CDA meetings like we're doing here makes a lot of sense. We have, I'm not going to go through everything in here. This is in your packet and you can ask me questions certainly, but we've got an agenda here today that you know about. The first main assignment that we have as part of this redevelopment planning effort is to identify the redevelopment planning areas. And that's kind of a two-part effort. One of the parts is very statutory, and we have to identify areas, I'll get into the details in a second, areas that meet the statutory definition of blight or a blighted area. And we'll talk about what that means as we go forward. And then the second is more like local, is what do we want to do, and where might the CDA and the village might need to provide an extra push to make redevelopment happen in a way that's consistent with the village's plans. So that's the qualitative piece that is, extremely important as well. So the whole process in September and October is to identify the potential redevelopment areas and then make sure they meet the statutory test. And then by action of the Community Development Authority and Village Board, those areas get, established as kind of official areas that we're looking at, including in a redevelopment plan. So, and we'll talk about the redevelopment areas, substantively today. That's a main part of our meeting. So that's all this stuff that you see kind of scrolling by in September and October. And what we definitely need to do, particularly as we get further along in the process, is work with the CDA's attorney or the village attorney to make sure we're crossing all the statutory T's and dotting the I's, because it is a kind of a bureaucratic process that we have to follow. So so then once those areas are sort of established, including, just get an initial sense as to why each area is established, what might be a broad goal, promote, mixed use redevelopment, or, whatever it happens to be for each area. Then we move to the more substantive part of our process. And that process would, I think commence later in the fall and into the winter. And that includes, connecting with the major property owners and other stakeholders within each of the redevelopment areas, interviewing them, making sure that, everyone knows what's going on and what's not going on. There's an easy opportunity through this type of process to breed confusion. And we're going to try to avoid that. I think, we talked about that during the scoping of this process, and also to make use of the web page to communicate and share information and be transparent with what we're doing. Then the general idea through November and December is that we prepare through this technical advisory committee and the CDA, a redevelopment project plan, sort of an umbrella plan that includes the statutory details, but also individual project plans for however many redevelopment areas that we come up with, including the required contents. And I think the next thing on the agenda is their sort of statutory stuff and what we need to include. And I'll hold getting into detail until we get to that agenda item. But then the idea would be that over the course of the winter, we'd work through the approval process, required public hearings, provide opportunities for public comment at each CDA meeting for people who have questions, concerns, and then ultimately bring this forward for CDA and village board approval through the winter of next year. So happy to answer questions on that in general, or if you had if there's anything specific on this thing that I'm scrolling through, feel free to let me know. All right, I don't hear anyone. That either means my internet is completely broken or you don't have any questions. I'll assume the latter. The other thing that I guess was the next item on the agenda was to identify sort of the statutory guidelines or what we need to follow. And, I have that, that information. I have the full statute here if you have any specific questions about that. The thing that I was going to focus on was kind of go back to this white paper thing that we put together back in the spring, which covers the statute, I think, in a fairly good, reasonable manner. We're bound to follow section 66.133 Wisconsin statutes to prepare these redevelopment plans. Why is that important? Well, it enables where necessary and where determined necessary by the CDA and the village board for the CDA to become actively involved in promoting redevelopment. That includes potential for financing to assist with financing for redevelopment and in acquiring land for later resale for redevelopment. So, for instance, if a particular promising redevelopment site had actually 5 individual parcels and one of those parcels came available for sale, and the CDA could come in, become a temporary landowner, and then thereby facilitating the assembly of those 5 individual parcels for a bigger redevelopment site, 2 months or 2 years later.
Hey, Mark.
So that can be pretty powerful. Yes.
I think we have a hand up. I don't know if that's Mike. Michael, is that you?
It is, and I meant to just to unmute. I didn't mean to put my hand up. But
Okay,
since I'm talking, just want to let you know I am here and I'm on via phone because I'm traveling.
Thanks so much. I just didn't want to ignore you. Thank you.
Hi, Michael.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Can you see the screen at least as to the extent possible on your phone?
I can't. I'm just doing it via phone. I'm not actually on the Zoom video, so I'm just going to imagine it in my head as best I can.
That helps me. I'll do my best to describe what we're looking at when we're looking at it.
Sounds good.
So, under section 66.1333 of statutes, our first task, which can be confusing and challenging for a lot of people because the statute was written 60 years ago with terms that don't play very well today. So there's a lot of talk about blight, and there's talk about slum clearance and other sort of things that are just, not really in our language today very much, or if they are, they have very negative connotations. But so one of the things that we need to do for each of our redevelopment areas, though, under the statute is to identify particular geographic areas that are blighted under the statutory definition. And that means that at least half of the properties have at least one of the characteristics of blight. And what I have here on my screen are some of those things. And as I note in the text here, some of these are, oh yeah, I understand, roof caving in, pretty obvious example, but it's not nearly the only characteristic that might qualify a property as quote unquote blighted. So some of the statutory criteria I have here up on screen: inconsistent land use patterns. If we have an older business use amongst a group of single family houses kind of in the middle of a block, that might be enough to qualify that property as blight. Properties not being used for their highest and best use similarly could be a blight determination. If there's a very small house on a very large parcel, that potentially could qualify. Visual and
Rebecca, did you need to raise your hand? I'm sorry, Mark. Rebecca, did you? Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure. I just wanted to let you know, Mark, if you couldn't see that there's a hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wanting to get a little bit more explanation as to what, I know you kind of touched on what inconsistent land or highest and best use, because I think that is an area that could potentially be a real sticking point for a lot of people. And I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page on that, because first off, who determines what's highest and best?
Yeah. So I wouldn't, as your kind of advisor, I wouldn't lean on that one very much. And I don't even know if I have it on my standard list. I'll get to in a second. So it is very subjective. It's it's a term that appraisers use, and I'm not one of those. Okay. So I wouldn't want to get too hung up on that one.
Good deal. Thank you.
Yeah. So other criteria: obsolete land ownership or land division patterns. That often relates to very small lots, which we in redevelopment areas that is typically a condition that we're dealing with. These lots might have been developed for residential use many years ago on 5,000, 7,000 square foot lots. But in order to redevelop them for uses that make sense today, you often have to assemble several of those to make it work. So that's a condition that does come into play, certainly. Substandard buildings, hazardous to so then there's more common and less common thing. Transportation problems. If we have a corner lot that their driveway is 6 feet away from the intersection of North and Main, well, that's not a condition that is representing sort of safe traffic movement today, and may trigger or qualify a property for as a condition of blight. So what I'll end up doing with that kind of information, I'm going to pop up on screen an example table from another community. I think I shared this Weston plan with you that I did a couple of years ago. Is within each redevelopment area, we'll go property by property. We'll do some of it in the office, but then we'll go out in the field, and essentially walk the sidewalks. And these criteria listing that you see here in the columns, you have to tip your head sideways, are the complete list of things that might qualify a property as blighted. So we'll just go literally with this table and check boxes. So you see that these first 3 properties didn't have any blight conditions, but as we go through some of the other ones, they had a couple to one to several. And so then at the end of the day, we just go through this whole list and say, yeah, this area does or doesn't qualify as a blighted area. Or you say, well, it doesn't qualify, but if we shift the boundaries around a little bit to remove these perfectly good properties, quote unquote, we would have that minimum 50% meeting one of these criteria. It is, Rebecca, your concerns are warranted. It's something that we have to be completely above ground with as to what we're doing and why we're doing it. I was at a meeting again in Weston, and they handed out T-shirts. I am not blight, So, you know, we definitely need to be sensitive to that. We need to have kind of consistent messaging that is accurate as to what this means and what it doesn't mean. But, you know, the reality is that many people, everyone in this area who lives in this area is already in a redevelopment area that has been determined to be blighted at some point in the past. And they've been living their lives happily ever since without any, you know, probably any knowledge of the fact that they were in a redevelopment area or a quote unquote blighted area. So anyway, that's our trick, you know, in these first kind of 6 months or 6 weeks, I would say, is to, you know, come up with these areas that, you know, again, will be a combination of our wants and what honestly and professionally meets the definition. And then we work on the redevelopment plan. But yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question or make a comment. I've worked on some of these types of projects previously, and I know how when this information leaks out to the community, how damaging it can be to the process, or how it can scare people to find out that their property is somehow now in the middle of this. I remember when I worked on road entry to Token Creek Park, or not Token Creek, the park over by the truck stops. And they were talking about closing that door. And when we got to a state meeting, they had a red X on the truck stop as going to be taken out of business potentially. And nobody had ever told the truck stop. And it impacted their business significantly. So how do we, as we have public meetings and as the CDA works on this, keep that information that we need kind of quiet and still meet the conditions of doing this in a public way? Does that make any sense? Confidentiality, yeah.
Oh, you mean that a particular property has been classified as having characteristics of blight?
Yeah, and yeah.
I don't know that we can do that to you know, so a table like this is a table that's actually in the redevelopment plan that, you know, shares the opinion that, you know, a particular property does or doesn't meet, you know, a condition. So I think the key in that case is to explain to people what it is. I mean, I'm not going to map all this stuff. You know, we don't have to show a map that, oh, my neighbor's property is blighted, but mine isn't, or vice versa. But we do have to share the information.
Okay.
And then I think it's incumbent on us to share also information that, you know, we know, you know, Q&A documents or something. What does it mean if my property is, you know, got a condition of blight? Well, it doesn't mean a bulldozer is going to come tomorrow. It doesn't mean that you can't sell your property, you know, and it doesn't mean you're going to get any less for your property than you would have without this determination. So that kind of thing, you know, I just, you know, wrote down that, especially when we, you know, the thing you're looking at right now becomes properties in DeForest and not properties in Weston. I think we're going to want to have that, you know, right away.
And Mark, could I ask or make a comment that I think that this is all something we have to do with kind of a timeline we talked about with Mark a little bit before this meeting, and kind of the communication timeline of what we do when and who we talk to, and, you know, those meetings that we have and that sort of thing. I think we need to lay that out before we start kind of doing this. Do you agree, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, you know, it's part of the communication, you know, timeline. You know, we can reach out to certainly, you know, key property owners, but if we have redevelopment areas that have, you know, 60 owners in it, which is certainly possible, you know, it's going to be hard to do individual, hey, did you know we're doing this and we're designating this area to each and every owner before we even start the process.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, this can influence you, obviously, as to where we identify areas as potential redevelopment areas. And, there's other things that will influence us. So as we begin to talk about areas here very shortly. Yeah, it's like, hey, well, we don't really need to designate this area because I don't think the CDA is going to be involved, or CDA doesn't need to be involved because the private market is, doing fine, on its own, that kind of thing. All right, I think that's, I'm happy to answer more questions about the statute, but, the statute also guides, what we have to include in the redevelopment plan. And it's not terribly onerous, but it does, I will point out that it does require us within each redevelopment area to have a land use plan that shows proposed uses, including the intensity of building development, the potential value increase if redevelopment occurs according to the plan, and what things like changes to ordinances or public utilities might be needed to actually make that happen. And finally, if the redevelopment activities would include relocation, a proposed plan and method for relocation. I can tell you, again, there's a standard process for doing this. We can refer back to the Weston plan. It's not as burdensome to include in a plan that we are, if there is any family relocation, all required statutory procedures will be followed, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the kind of thing we would include in the redevelopment plan.
I have a question.
Yes.
Coming from the housing authority's side for me, so this is all new when we talk redevelopment, but what is the main reason to look at redevelopment in an area? Is it for better experience for the people that live and work there? Is it to bring in more tax dollars? Is it for safety? And I know it's kind of a general question, but just in your experience, what's the main reason communities do redevelopment? What are they looking for?
Well, I think there's probably two primary reasons. One of them is to increase the tax base. And the second one is to create, better places for people to live and be. So, and I think that will be important for us to communicate early and often why we're doing this here in DeForest. If we can't articulate a good reason, then it's going to be, super hard to identify these areas. So, I think the reasons are very important. I think some other reasons, include, making use of the places in the community that already have great access to services, utilities, roads, as opposed to always looking at the next green field to grow out into. So efficient, cost-effective growth. Safety could be a factor. In other words, you could be thinking about, safety, traffic safety, having people not, living along busy roads, I suppose. But also potentially safety from crime. Some of the redevelopment areas do focus in different communities on places that, high police calls and things like that. So that could be a reason. I think the key, here is advancing, a vision for, what we want DeForest to be. So it does and should harken back to the overall vision for the village.
Mark,
So-
I think Rebecca has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'm patient. You were answering part of my question anyway. No, I was kind of piggybacking off of what Doug was just asking about, because part of what I'm thinking in terms of redevelopment is, well, obviously rundown areas, but maybe a part of the community that just isn't working the way it was intended to work. I'm thinking specifically in terms of like our downtown area where, that we started to redevelop it and kind of it got stalled, and it's just not done what we really want it to do. And that's, that is what I look at as kind of a redevelopment. I don't know if that's helpful at all, Doug.
And can I add to that, Rebecca, that
Yeah.
there's also parts of our community that were developed many, many, many years ago. And the community has changed significantly. And just as an example amongst this group is if you look at North Main, as you go out of town, that was the outskirts. That was almost rural when I was a kid. Now it's really not. And some of the buildings that are located there are not conducive to attracting other businesses, or they're not going to last a long time, or it's kind of not the use we have in our vision. So I think of those areas too.
Thank you. That all helps.
Yeah, and I think it'll be useful. And when I look away, it's not because I'm not paying attention, I'm writing stuff down here. But I think it'll be useful to, perhaps even before our first CDA meeting next week, to come up, enumerate a list of, not 20, but 3 or 4 goals. Why are we doing this? Why are, and starting the Q&A document even as to the questions that, you are asking me, because those are the questions that, certainly people in the community will begin to ask us.
And I think it's important to note, and I meant to do this at the beginning, that doing these comprehensive plan meetings, and I know Doug and Rebecca have had a chance to go, I heard more than probably anything else about revitalization and the desire of the community for that. And so I think it's also a way to get people excited about it too, and kind of help get and let them be a part of it.
Yep. And recognizing we had that community survey last fall, and there were some 50-50 kind of questions and certainly debatable points, but I think one of them was not, do we want the downtown to revitalize? I think that, received very strong support from the community above even many other economic development goals.
Right.
Okay, so I think the next item on the agenda is to start talking about these particular redevelopment areas, if we're ready to do that.
Can you make that map bigger?
Yes, I definitely can. And I'm going to go through this map series has several different maps in it. So what I'm proposing to do here is I've got what I worked on yesterday was identifying a very general list of 11 different candidate areas that we could potentially suggest to be among this maximum of 6 different redevelopment areas that we would be geographically creating and including in our redevelopment plan. So I just included some resources to kind of head us in. This is just the comprehensive plan map from, or the future land use map from the village's comprehensive plan, which identifies recommended future uses. So I don't have any particular reason for showing this, except that it could be a useful reference for questions and some of the reasons why we might be promoting, an area for redevelopment. So for an example, North and Main is identified in this purple color, and that's indicated for planned mixed use development. And when we get into the downtown area, it'll just it'll describe a little bit more what it means. So, but that's an underpinning for what we're doing and why we're doing it to a significant extent. And I'm going to just kind of tumble through some of these maps, and then you're going to see some specific candidate sites in a second here. But another resource that we have is to look at is what is land currently zoned. And in fact, we have to report on that. So sometimes that zoning reflects the desired future use. Sometimes it doesn't, and could be something that if we identify a particular redevelopment area in a plan, we say, well, we have to kind of work with the property owners to change the zoning if we're going to make this redevelopment happen. So that's just another resource for us. The third one here that I think many of you have seen is the map that shows all the different tax incremental districts within the village. To the extent to which redevelopment areas can overlap with TID is good, because then we have, perhaps the village's best funding source to make redevelopment happen and possible, and a potential funding source for the CDA. If, for example, there was a property that came for sale within one of these tax incremental districts, and the village and CDA, village board and CDA said, hey, CDA, you got to buy this and hold it so it doesn't slip through our fingers and make redevelopment, happen there that much more difficult.
Mark,
So, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, if you could scroll up just a little bit or scroll back just a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
I'm
Where am-
specifically, no, the other direction.
Yes, and here we go.
Yes,
Yes.
right there. So I'm specifically looking at that lower left-hand portion of TID 1 that's closed.
Yeah,
Once a TID has closed, because that area is still,
mhm.
I mean, in my opinion, it's still prime redevelopment area.
Yeah, hasn't quite gotten there yet. Yeah, I get it.
Right. What is the possibilities, once a TID is closed, of re-identifying maybe a smaller portion of a previous TID for a new TID? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand your question fully. The village right now is locked into, or cannot add new TIDs,
Okay,
or cannot expand its existing TIDs until it gets the total value of property in the TIDs less than 12% of the total value of the village as a whole.
okay.
And-
Could you expand on that? I don't quite understand what you just said.
Yeah, so let's just say that if the total value of the village was $100 million, just to make this easy, that's total land plus assessed value of the village. What that means is that the total value within all TIDs combined could not be more than $12 million. It's okay if it gets higher than 12 or it becomes 16 or 18, but that just means that the village cannot create more TIDs until that
Until it
number
drops below.
So how does it drop below? It drops below by shrinking the size of tax incremental districts, and the village did that with TID before it was closed, or completely closing a TID. So when the TID 1 was completely closed in 2016, that unlocked a lot of capacity for the village to create
Other
new
TIDs.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So in order to potentially get maybe that little section in a TID again, we would kind of have to finish in some of the other TID areas and close out some of those.
That's the easiest way to do it. There is a second potential way. And what the TID law does allow expenditures within the TID boundary, certainly, to promote redevelopment and economic development. But it also allows expenditures within 1/2 mile of a TID boundary, as long as that expenditure would promote, it could be argued that would advance the goals of the TID. So, a common thing that just for the sake of argument, a utility improvement that happened, a 1/4 mile from a TID, but was necessary to get sewer to that TID, absolutely would qualify.
So some of the stuff that could be required to help TID 6 in that small area could potentially kind of be drawn into that one. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so as you see, TID 6 kind of snakes down into the North Main Street area. So, it may require some, creative thinking, under the law, but it's conceivable that, projects that occur outside of TID 6 that we could argue benefit TID 6 could be undertaken with TID support. Now, that'll probably require an amendment to the TID project plan, because right now it's not written to accommodate that, but we can certainly amend the plan for a TID tax incremental district if that's seems to be a necessary and important way to implement a redevelopment area plan. All right, good questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other resource I have here, this was the 1994 redevelopment area. So you can see there was a lot of, I'll just call it gerrymandering to make the boundary work for the 50% requirement. So it included, parts of the North Main, actually not any of Northern Maine, the railroad corridor, extending from the old downtown area where Town Square is right now in the library. It included a completely greenfield site that ended up developing with residential subdivisions south of Fireman's Park. And it included the business, what became the business park. So, in that case, the redevelopment area, facilitated and enabled some land acquisition and sale. But most of its function, as we've kind of talked about, has passed. But anyway, it's an interesting resource. This redevelopment area still exists technically, but it's just been moribund for 10, 15 plus years. So anyway, then this is where it gets a little more interesting. Is I spent yesterday, and some of these we've talked about already, identifying actually 11 candidate sites. 10 are in the northern historic part of the village. The other one that is possible, although not currently in the village, is in the town of Burke near the Pine Cone and the land south of Camping World. To talk about today and to get your opinion and advice as to which ones we should be advising the CDA consider for my study, where I'd go and do this kind of light analysis and then drawing boundaries around. And before I get into these specifics, I will say that it's certainly possible that these areas could be combined. So in other words, 4 could be combined in a larger redevelopment area with 6 conceivably and so forth. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So and the way I think it made sense to me as I think about the village and where these areas are concentrated is to work our way west along North Street, where we have a fair number of potential candidates from I think the campground, and we'll talk about that in a second, extending all the way east to the remaining parts of Russ Carroll's land between North and Holum. And then working our way back on Holum to include the Holum Educational Center area, the northeastern part of the downtown from that site to the older, pieces of the downtown, the Village Hall area. Talking about other potential parts of the older downtown, the area around the bowling alley, for instance, and the area around Chase, for instance, along Market Street as potential, ideas. Extending a little further south, the DeFora Plaza area, where we, currently have a larger mall north and south is in there, for instance, to ground you a little bit. So I have several maps now to go through each of these and talk a little bit about them. And I'd encourage our discussion, and if it's clear that one or more of these just doesn't pass a sniff test, let's eliminate it quickly. And so we can focus on what really does and what we really want to focus on. But before I do that, any kind of quick comments?
The community forums that you had, were they consistent with these properties also when people did their mapping and suggestions?
Well, I will say that I specifically mentioned the Holum Education Center in my presentation, so I sort of probably led people down that path, but that was certainly mentioned more than once. But I think just about everyone talked about the North and Main intersection area in particular, and many people talked about what Rebecca said, sort of finishing what we started in the sort of the walkable portion of the downtown area. And some people did also talked about the DeForest Plaza area, on South Main Street as well. I haven't studied all of the results, so I can't really say, what else, but maybe, a couple of you were also there, so I'd be interested to hear your opinion on that.
Number 4 is what always sticks out in my mind, living here and working here is an area that could definitely benefit.
Yeah. And probably one of those areas where, most people would say, yeah, oh, I see that what you mean by a blighted area, and that, seems to qualify.
Yeah, I heard from people, I think from several different groups last night, that were mentioning not the pick and save, but the post office side. I think a lot of people are wanting to see that revitalized.
Those calls too, Rebecca, it's pretty consistent.
Yeah. And then definitely the North Main, that was, I think, like you said, everybody was mentioning that. And actually, I think even had you not mentioned the Holcomb Center, I think people would have mentioned that anyway, because I've heard people mention that to me in passing, even not at that meeting. By the way, really good meeting last night. Very well conducted. Great tools for folks to be using. Had some really positive feedback just from people who talked to me, and they really appreciate it. Some people that I wasn't sure if they were going to appreciate it really appreciated it. So kudos, very good job.
Well, I'm glad it worked, and we'll work on the results, and so I can answer that question that Doug asked me better, because there was definitely a lot of interest in redevelopment and focusing on the older parts of town. Okay, so let's just tick through these, and then I'll offer my 2 cents, and then everyone else can on each one of these sites. So I numbered each of these maps, campground area. So and some of these maps I included the municipal boundaries that were important, and some I included some other features. My impression, so the campground is in the village of DeForest, former KOA. It was acquired by a new group within the past year or two. To get there, you do work through DeForest, but I think the subway and everything between the subway and the old Burger King is actually in the town of Vienna right now. So, my kind of initial, where I was sitting 5 years ago, I suppose I was feeling that this campground is not long for this earth, but lots seems to have changed since then. We've got, obviously new owners, new investment. I think their interests are in keeping it as a campground. With COVID in particular, people have gravitated towards all forms of camping and outdoor activity. I'm not sure that this is a likely candidate to redevelop, nor am I sure if the owner wants to. So, I know this is just the first one, but it's not high on my list of, sites.
And I find that site to be, I would put it lower on my list, but I do think that some of the areas around it could use some sprucing up or development activity, or somehow be brought into complement with brighter futures of businesses around them.
Yeah, completely agree. And if this were entirely village of DeForest up there, I would say it might rise a little higher. But the fact that it's in a different municipality, it's not impossible, but it would require village town collaboration. They would have to participate on this planning effort. It would be more difficult. The other thing I can say about this area is that it's got the traffic, it's got the interchange, it's got things that could easily drive development and redevelopment without an extra push from this group. And it is within TID, at least the stuff in the village is within TID 9 already. So where there is a need for an incentive or something to make something happen, we do have that opportunity here. So I would, I don't know, we haven't really talked about how we're going to do this, but, we can come forward with a presentation, with these 11 items and then sort of with a recommendation from our technical team on each one of them. So we'll tentatively go with a no on this one.
I would just like to, excuse me, add that the boundary lines I see on this map look absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Does the town of Vienna have islands within the forest?
No, there are no islands, but the peninsulas are pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's move on to the next one. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So this one has been kicking around for a number of years. It's sort of the bend on County V or North Street in the inner part of the bend. So we've had, again, some of this is in Vienna and some of this is in the village. The difference here is that the property owner, whoever that is or could be, would have probably significant incentive to annex to the village, and that would be permitted to get sewer and water services to them. So this land that's on the left side of this red line, which is in the town of Vienna, could easily come into the village. So we have two properties for sale. One is under, it's kind of a dumbbell shaped property under the word village, and then to the northwest of that. And then another property for sale. It's actually 3 separate parcels totaling 12 acres. The larger parcel of 9 acres where the hand is right now, and then 3 1-acre parcels that were created for reasons I cannot explain to anyone. So we know, and I tried to get a little bit more intel from Brandy Cooper, that there has been some recent interest from a private property owner in acquiring this site, or both of these sites. They are identified in the village's comprehensive plan for what's called 2-family townhouse residential, which is sort of a moderate density residential development form, condos, townhouses, small scale kind of walk-ups, things like that. And that property owner, at least based on their initial contacts with us, is in that ballpark, what he might want to do. The challenge has always been in anyone who's wanted to acquire this site is having the wherewithal to fund the infrastructure necessary to serve it. One of the things that the village staff have promoted was to extend public utilities and a public street from the end of Meadowview Lane here up through the development area and extend that to V, probably where the current driveway is located. And that seems to be a tripping point or a sticking point with folks who have expressed interest in the property. And we've had all sorts of inquiries from, rural home sites, 5-acre home sites to large outdoor storage yards and other things. And we've been trying to hold the line on the village's plan and interest for this area to promote it as an area for housing development.
Does Vienna have a sewer service on that parcel?
I don't believe they do.
Okay.
Would it be possible to get us maps showing these boundary lines? Like even a paper map that would show this? Is that a possibility? Because it would certainly help me.
You mean where Vienna and Windsor are? I think we have those maps.
Probably the whole village. If we're going to be talking about the whole areas just going forward, it would be good for me to have a map showing all these boundary lines. I had no idea how they zigzagged.
Yeah, I'll get, I'll work with Michelle and we'll get that out to you today.
Could you get one to me also?
Yeah, I'll view that. Yeah, you
Oh,
bet.
awesome. Thank you.
And send us the white paper again too, if you could, Mark.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I had to leave for a second, but I can get all that stuff to you too.
Yeah, Michelle, I think we have got a good jurisdictional boundaries map that we updated just last year that
Okay.
I'll make sure that you have. You know, in
you.
terms of the boundaries of this, you know, particular redevelopment area, I was intentional to not draw them because, you know, really it's the field work and, you know, helps determine what the precise boundaries ought to be. But, you know, generally speaking, if I could draw on this map in a way that people can see, and I'm sorry, Michael, I know you can't see any of this, but, you know, what we're talking about, and it's, if you ever done this on Zoom, you appreciate how hard it is to draw, but is roughly like this. Those are the parcels that are available for sale. So you know, one of the things that we want to do, and I want to do, is to, you know, understand how real this latest property owner or potential purchaser's interest is. Because literally, Brandy and I have, over the last 5 years, dealt with no fewer than 10 potential purchasers of these two properties. And it just, it seems to be very difficult to get over the hump with them. But as we think about the community and community development, it does seem like a good opportunity for housing that would, you know, advance some community goals, whether it was for seniors or for the workforce or just the general population.
And some of the hurdles are utilities and access, because coming off of V and around that bend is difficult.
Correct, and we've studied that issue. It's not ideal, but if you're following, you're able to follow what we're talking about for a road is very roughly what I just drew here. It would be much more elegant, but getting a public street connected, and then that housing area could have access to V, and they wouldn't have to, quote unquote, traipse through, you know, the lands to the south to get in and out every time they wanted to go. Emergency services really wants this, you know, particularly if it were for elderly or other people housing, to get people in and out safely. And then as you think about County V improving in the future for people in cars, for people on bikes, for people walking, that would give them a nice outlet to get to, you know, the Quick Trip and other things, which are, you know, really just a stone's throw from here.
So quick question on that. So that potential road and onto County V, we're really close to another stoplight just around the other bend. And what would be the likelihood or the suggestibility of having another light there for that access? Because that I'm thinking in terms of sight lines for people coming out onto CV or out onto V from that imaginary road, versus coming in maybe through Trailside and having, you know, improving, you know, where your imaginary road ends over to the right.
Yeah.
Over to the right.
Uh-huh.
Right there. So there's that little road there that goes over to Trailside to the right.
Oh yeah.
You know, or, you know, just having those. Oh, I didn't even see that one. You know, I don't know what that entrance up on V really concerns me. I can see some really bad accidents from people getting out onto CV and crossing traffic.
Yeah, no, I understand. You know, again, it's not ideal. It's not the way you draw it up. If we had to start from scratch, we have looked at that. We have kind of tested sight lines. The distances do meet normal standards.
Oh, okay.
You know, the idea is that you should be able to see at least 500 feet in either direction, and you can definitely do that.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. You know, that's not to say that, you know, we might, if there was a road here, that vegetation would need to be cut, you know, maybe the hillside would need to be cut back, you know, there would, you know, have to be special care, absolutely. So, you know, again, my impression is I'm kind of 50-50 on this. If we can get the private market to move on it, great. We have, I think, some promise right now. I just, before our meeting, asked Brandy what the latest was. She's busy, so she hasn't gotten back to me yet. But you know, my impression is to keep this on our list, at least temporarily. But
I would
welcome
say-
your.
I would agree with that, Mark, and I think that, you know, the reason it's gone through so many different people of interest is because there are significant challenges
Yeah.
with the site, and so I would keep it. I would keep it on there for consideration at least.
Okay. Well, let's put it as a maybe right now, and then we'll see where we're at the end of this.
And I think it could be a good workforce housing site too.
Mhm.
Yeah, certainly close to where the workforce needs to be.
I agree. I think that is a really good idea for that.
And I think, and in terms of that particular issue, I think the neighborhood support for that, or maybe lack of neighborhood opposition, would probably be dependent on having a road access out, so that, you know, the added traffic wouldn't all be going through the neighborhood. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to clear these scribbles and then go on to the next site. Next site is just down the street, very short distance. I'm sorry. All right. And it's the site of the former Sunset Grill that's been vacant for about 5 years now, and the auto shop that's to its east. I think both of those sites were created at the same time, you know, probably about 50 years ago now.
Park Place is on, or Parks Automotive hasn't been there all that long, have they? Maybe 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mark, I didn't get back to you before this meeting, but a dental office has purchased the Sunset. Yeah, so they are in plans to rehabilitate that area for that. So I just wanted to let folks know about that.
It's interesting because they were displaced when we redeveloped downtown.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so that's encouraging. As I was going through this exercise yesterday, I clicked on the parcel and said, "Oh, Mercy Dental."
Mhm.
Now, so
They just closed on it maybe 2 weeks ago.
and this might be one of those examples, like the campground, where we might have the private market, you know, doing what we want it to do without our push. So unless people want to stop me, I'm just going to say put this in our no category right now and move on to the next one. All right. So see, these next several relates to the this downtown revitalization plan that has been in the village's plans for about, let's see here, 2011, about 10 years now. It's currently in the comprehensive plan, the 2015 comp plan. And I bring this up here because it certainly focused and recommended the redevelopment of the North Main Street area. The darker blue colors are identified redevelopment opportunity areas. And it also recommended, well, you know, good news is redevelopment of the site that became the Norsky Nook and the village campus area. But it also kind of pointed to a couple longer term areas. The one kind of at the end of Lindy and Columbia, there's some industrial uses along the railroad in that area. And as longer term redevelopment / reinvestment potential, it also identified the northwest corner of Stevenson and Holum, right across from the police station, as a potential area for redevelopment or reinvestment. And then it suggested that the buildings that sort of begin with what became BB Jack's to the west through the bowling alley and some of the residential parcels would be an area for potential reinvestment or facade improvements in that area. So that's one thing I just, as we go through these sites, I want to kind of keep in mind. And then finally, what we advised for the Chase Lumber Market Street area in that 2015 plan was site and facade improvements to enhance Chase Lumber. Our impression then, and I don't know if that's changed, is that Chase is a long-term, tenant occupant of the downtown area, and that's awesome. And we don't want to do anything to stop that from happening. So it wasn't identified for was not identified for redevelopment in the 2015 plan as a result.
Rebecca
I
is,
apologize. I hate to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know, as a courtesy, I have to leave now. I will watch the rest of this on video. I'll get it from Michelle. But I got to get back to my other job. So thank
Rebecca.
you. This has been super helpful.
Thank you.
So with that sort of backdrop, we've got some sites that kind of wind around there. And the first one is the North Main Street intersection area. And this could potentially be a pretty vast area extending almost to Stevenson Street on the east, to Antique Lane on the south, and to the restaurant I'm blanking on its name on the west edge on North Street.
Timbers?
Thanks.
Timbers is kind of a sacred property.
Yeah, kind of
So that may be a reason to exclude, but it also is a just giant site. They have way more land than they need. And I think either the site to the west of it is owned by them or owned by another individual that's completely vacant.
I was just being smart. I wasn't excluding them. I just, so would we, can you go through? I'm not quite sure how far over. We're going to Stevenson Street? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't draw any lines because I don't think that's just early right now. But it could stop at the tracks. It could extend east to Stevenson Street. I know there's some newer, commercial buildings on the north side that look just fine, but there's also some older residential properties that, I just don't know whether they would logically be redevelopment areas or just areas that we'd want to preserve and keep.
There's that house that is on the north side of North Street that I think it's right about where the railroad tracks are, but it has never been painted in the last, it looks like forever years, and it is very, very bad looking.
Yeah, I'm losing my resolution here, but if I zoom in too close, but so I think broadly speaking, at least, we've all agreed that this is one, rises to the top. I think the question is, what are the outer boundaries? And in some cases, it'll be the plans of the village and meeting the criteria for a blighted area that'll drive that. And it's conceivable as we talk about some of these other areas that are close that, this area could expand to encompass it, and it would just be one larger area as opposed to three, areas that were, within spitting distance of one another. So we can think about that. But I think we'll put this in the yes category.
Good. And I just heard that a couple of properties on Antique Lane sold. Do you know if that's true, Michelle?
I don't.
Randy had asked me about some zoning issues related to one of them. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
Okay, I'll get with her and see.
I think it was Ed Motive's family property that was sold to someone, and Brian, the guy who does lawn mowing, had the back of the property and then they had the front of the property, and it was sold.
That would make sense because I called the realtor last week on that property and I haven't gotten a call back.
Ah,
Oh, that's the one. Okay.
Is it the one right next to the tracks, or is it the one to the west of it where the white top building is on the map?
the one to the west of it,
Yeah.
the yellow building.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on. I think the next one we have is the Russ Carroll's remaining property, which I think we could probably argue has got the blight characteristics to it.
Yeah.
And so, and this is another area where, Russ, or, Quick Trip aside, I mean, which Russ sold and is, obviously not part of the redevelopment area, it's just been a challenge to get off the ground. I think the main challenge has been how much of this land may need to stay open to manage for flood control in the long term. And Russ is, well, we had a rezoning proposal on this property in winter of 2019, and then March of 2019 came and half of this property was underwater. And that, put the kibosh on that. And I think since then it's been a bit of a polite match of whose problem is that. With Russ's position is, this is not my water. This is other people's water coming to my property. The two villages should take care of this so I don't have to deal with this flooding in the future. And the Village of DeForest staff position has been, I am being very general here, has been, this water has always flowed through this property. This is the way, these are conditions that have always existed. It's very unfortunate that the rains have come, more severely and frequently and at the end of winter when the ground's frozen. But this is something that, Russ, you need to accommodate in your plans and set aside enough land to reflect the fact that this is, a condition that affects your property. And, I don't know that we've ever gotten past that with Russ.
But certainly, the corner by Fulham Street where his old farm is, I mean, that is just such an eyesore. And
Yeah.
it's a major entrance to the community. It's visible from 51 and Northtown Road. And I think it impacts the community, the houses, the area around it as well. So
Yeah. So we probably put it on the yes side of the ledger, I mean, for our purposes. And we've also identified over and over again in the communities, when again, these community meetings we've had where we've asked people, where should we site higher density housing? 51 corridor always has come to the top of the list. And this site is, I think, ideal. And we've had some concept plans in the past that have suggested that, putting higher density housing here. It could be senior, it could be a workforce, be a great spot for family housing. We got the schools, a hop, skip, and a jump for all but grades 4 through 6 now from this site. So, anyway, I'm preaching to the choir now, I think.
yeah, and I agree with that.
And he's been great to talk to and work kind of through these. I had a last conversation I had with him was a couple weeks ago, and he's going to come by to visit soon. So he's been great.
No, yeah, but we used to be real roundabout about having those buildings removed. I'm become very, direct with him when I talk to him. I say,
Yeah.
Russ, you got to get those buildings down. You're never going to be able to sell this land unless those buildings, you take them down. And so, but again, there's just seems to be, and that's the second thing, getting over the hump with him. So if the village were in maybe a better position to help with that, it might work. And if this was a spot for workforce housing, this would be one of those areas where I'm afraid it's outside of a half mile, isn't it? From yes. Oh yeah. So we have a little bit greater challenge, but the finance people can help us to figure out how we might be able to help him with these issues.
Well, I would certainly put a high priority on this property.
Yeah. The next one is probably in that category too. It's the It's a Holm Education Center site. I just drove around this yesterday just to kind of get a sense for the lay of the land. These houses that are on the same block are really nice and well kept. I had this gentleman on the corner of Cleveland and Holm was out, maintaining his lovely garden when I was driving by. The reason so this will be a challenge in identifying, is it just the Holm site or is it the whole block? Because it's conceivable that, someone could come forward and say, well, hey, I love this site, but this little notch here, it'd be great if I could take 540 East Holm, as well and incorporate it in my redevelopment plan. So that's the only question mark I have. Yeah, and then the broader question is this part of a bigger redevelopment area that might extend down to DeForest Street, for instance, which is just a block to the south?
One of my questions would be, what would we do with it? I mean, would we make it multifamily and then leaving residential might work? Or are we looking at, some sort of commercial or, like a senior housing or 509 kind of housing? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what we would want to do with it, but I clearly think we have to bring the community in and put this on a top priority from my perspective.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you're right. And I know from talking to Michelle and others that the rumor patrol runs rampant on this site, as to what's going to happen here. And really, we don't know. I think the three top candidates, Jane, in no particular order, are some sort of senior housing, some sort of workforce housing, some sort of institutional reuse, another school or a community, based facility.
Community center's been suggested.
Yeah, something like that. The district is getting rid of the building for pretty good reasons. And so I don't know, it'll depend on, people smarter than us to figure out whether that building's reusable or not. But it could be more than one of those things too. It's a big site. It's 5 acres, and it's got this kind of interesting. I put the topography on here because it sort of lends itself almost to two redevelopment sites, sort of an upper area and a lower area.
Right.
So we'll see, and we can have some fun with concept planning for this site too.
It's also an emotional site, and we have to remember that people who went to high school there, people who went to junior high in the building that was torn down, get really emotional when they talk about this site. It was a critical part of the community for a very long time.
Yeah. So then that leads to the seventh site where I just said, what about the northeast, part of the downtown? So here's the Holm Education Center site. Here's DeForest Street, just north, where we have clearly existing affordable housing, and we have to kind of keep that in mind. We don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face with respect to affordable housing. But also some areas that have had some challenges for the community. And then as we head towards, everyone asked me what the downtown is. I think the east edge is Stevenson Street. And at the east edge of the downtown, we have some older buildings, older commercial buildings, and, the bowling alley, which would certainly benefit from a facade improvement. So the question, becomes, is this Holm Education Center site all we're really looking at in this area, or should we be thinking about a redevelopment area that's broader and that reaches to the eastern parts of the downtown and to DeForest Street on the south?
I would like to see it be broader. And to think about it as a kind of cohesive plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be a northeast downtown plan where how do we bring the Holm Education Center site into the downtown, revitalization concept, whether it's through, 50 or 100 housing units or whatever the total ends up being, or some sort of supportive use for the downtown area. Okay, so I think what our initial lean then is this kind of, maybe the Holum site gets incorporated into something a little bit bigger that reaches back towards to the downtown and to Fireman's Park. Okay. And then to kind of continue on that theme, there's this sort of in between area, and I don't know. So so here's the bank, and our antique lane is just to the north of that, where we were talking about the North Main area. I'm not sure if it makes sense to just extend that redevelopment area to the south. It could make sense to extend the one we were just talking about to the west. It could make sense to connect the North Main area to the Holum Education Center area into one larger redevelopment area that would, maybe be shaped sort of like an L in the community as a whole. I think there are pros and cons for either approach. I think it would depend on what we're feeling about the Holum Street corridor from Stevenson to Main Street. If the notion is we're content with what's happening right there right now or not, or if the CDA could foresee a potential role in advancing property improvement or redevelopment there.
I would like to see us consider the L, because those areas have, there's a lot of impact on what happens if you worked on redeveloping East Holum down towards Maine.
Yeah.
Behind it was a bunch of not very well developed land. I think that would be a detractor.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to get a bigger picture view here with Google Maps. Yeah, so the idea, broadly speaking, would be to join the North Main area that we've talked about, down through the river corridor or something like that, to connect with the area where the rail intersects Holum today, and then to go to the east to include the Holum Center parcel as one, larger redevelopment area, just like we had in 1994. I mean, we had a way larger area in 94, but.
Would you add the Jefferson down to Jefferson Street or not?
We could. Are you thinking more in between the Market and Main Street?
Actually, what I was probably meaning was DeForest Street. I apologize.
Oh yeah, down. We could certainly extend down to DeForest Street.
Sorry, I misspoke.
Yeah.
Mark, is there an advantage to making these areas larger in terms of what the village designates as its redevelopment area in terms of being eligible for grant opportunities and things like that?
It couldn't hurt to represent that this is part of a very comprehensive plan to improve the north and east edges of the downtown.
That was my thought, is just not to include everything, but just to really kind of think that, okay, something that we might not exactly think is that area now might be worth it, to include it, unless there was some reason not to, for those purposes.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me, that having a large enough area that designated, if it's helpful, I like that. I'm looking at, and I can't understand why you can't tell what I'm pointing at. If you go up North Stevenson and over it's Durkee Street, is it? And then there's the industrial area that kind of hangs out there. That whole area is not real nice.
I was just driving down there, and there has been some recent investment in some of the housing, improving parking lots, and I think even one of these sites, they're improving the landscaping. It's an interesting area. Obviously, it developed when around the railroad, but I'm almost certain they're not using the railroad anymore. All the businesses seem to be a going concern, but it is, could potentially use some love, and if there's property owner interest for the village to get involved, that would be definitely a candidate site in my mind. So that is not far from the Holm Educational Center. It wouldn't be a gerrymandered boundary at all to have it be part of the redevelopment area that included both Holm and the North Main intersection.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that makes some sense, I think. So let me go back to my chart. We're actually almost done. Okay. Sorry, I'm just negotiating between multiple inputs here. The next one, that was on the list was sort of South Market Street. The featured property here is Chase Lumber, but the west side of Market has, some older buildings that were built for commercial purposes. Initially, I'm thinking of the building on Elm and Market, the northwest corner, for
The
instance.
Dragon property.
Yeah. So, and we did in 2015, the Plan Commission made a specific deliberate decision to extend our quote unquote downtown future land use category to include Market Street. So all of the west side of Market Street is identified on the future land use map for downtown redevelopment if, the property owners want to participate in that. So that would be one argument, I suppose, in favor. This would obviously be, one of those areas where Chase would be on, obviously on our interview list to see what their feelings are for their property. It certainly seems like a candidate, but it also seems to be, again, looking at the big picture, sort of separated from the L area that we've been talking about by areas that have been almost fully redeveloped between Stevenson and Main Street and Holm and Commerce Street. So I don't know that it would make sense as part of the L that we've been talking about earlier, but rather as its own separate area.
I note if we make that an area that 400 Market Street is for sale.
So I don't know what are other people's opinions on this one.
I think it's a good one for the list.
Okay.
The historic nature of the area, does that impact our plans at all, or what we can do?
I don't think there's any historic designation on the site that limits what can be done. It's just about, again, as we get into the planning, identifying which buildings have significance and as part of a redevelopment plan would want to be preserved or have an emphasis on preservation versus removal. I think that's a key point for all these sites that I've failed to mention so far, is that when we talk about redevelopment, and I think that immediately puts in people's heads a bulldozer. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be reusing existing buildings, reusing parts of existing buildings. If part of the Holm Educational Center building is reusable, but other parts aren't, partial demolition. So it doesn't have to be a full-scale redo of a particular building or site. Okay. So I'm going to put 9 in our definite maybe pile right now. And then we'll regroup and review these in just a second. And then the next one on the list, I'm fumbling. It means I'm moving you guys around so I can control my screen, is the DeForest Plaza area. And as as I had sort of envisioned it, it was, and it has been envisioned in prior village plans, which I'll share in a second. It really has been focused on the north building, with that, and not the south building, that includes the pick and save. So just to, and then just to share with you the plan. So this was a plan that we had CARPC staff assist us with as part of the 2015 comprehensive planning effort. And this is it was a redevelopment concept. I think it was a title, just to make sure. Draft Main Street and Van Buren Road redevelopment concept. I guess it was completed in 2014, but it was published as part of the 2015 plan. And that plan suggested that the existing building that includes the pick and save would be retained and continue to serve that function. But it suggested that there might be additional opportunities to put more commercial development along Main Street to kind of create more of a Main Street feel to it down there. And then if, again, with collaboration with the property owner, potential, in this case, demolition of the existing building, the opportunity to relocate some of the viable commercial uses in other buildings to make so housing happen on the site to further drive commercial development,
Right.
within the area. And in 2014, and especially now, we know that housing is what's driving redevelopment in almost all cases. The other thing that we have in this concept that we've battled with over the years is figuring out what the best use is for the site at the east end of South Street. It's low, it's wet, it also conveys stormwater through it considerable amount during storms. We've had proposals, as Jane knows, for kind of commercial uses, auto parts. There was another one before that, that just have breeded neighborhood challenges. So this concept suggests, well, let's put townhomes, not unlike what you see along current Conservancy Commons Park instead, and have helped that blend with the area. Now, again, this is just one concept, but the larger point that I'm trying to make is that we've been thinking about this site as a potential redevelopment area. I think that for 7 or 8 years, I think that probably has, unlike the KOA site or the Madison Campground site, has probably grown in urgency since then.
I don't know if I'm echoing for you. I apologize if I am. The buildings on not the pick and save side, but the other side of the plaza now have waist high weeds growing in front of the empty buildings and the post office area. I mean, it is so bad. I get a phone call almost every day. And I know that Brandy has talked to the landowner a couple of times, but people are just tired of it. The other part of it, though, the other side of the issue is people worry about losing their post office. And so that would have to be negotiated carefully because, the Postal Service is not adverse to closing offices for money saving reasons. So I just want us to be cautious, but clearly that site needs help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's we've all emphasized this, but there's a number of viable uses in that building. No one wants to see those uses go away. So any kind of redevelopment plan would have to account for that.
And when you talk about relocating businesses, it almost means we have to do multiple projects at once to have places, have a commercial project going to relocate them.
Before we do the housing.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's where there might be an opportunity again to rebuild some of these or to build on some of these sites that are closer to Main Street, or at least to have other locations. Maybe it's North and Main, where that are ready to accommodate that type of business use, if not here.
I know the bank is getting tired of how blighted the site is beginning to look. And, Luke appeared before the village board, but every time I go to the bank, they talk about how it's hard on their business and it's a bad perception. And
yeah. Well, okay. The final site that we have, and thank you for bearing with me. And if you have others that you thought of that is like, oh, Mark, you forgot completely about this one. Let's talk about them. Was the what I call the north interchange area of the interstate and 51. The primary challenge with this area is not in the village. It's in the town of Burke. So this area would necessitate, full collaboration with the town. This is in a so-called protected area of the Burke boundary agreement, which means it doesn't come into the village until 2036, until and unless the town of Burke were to agree to a transfer earlier. So, while it may, in many people's eyes, warrant some TLC on either side of 51, it's probably not as practical as several of these other sites that we, need to focus on.
This site was under great discussion, and I don't know if it currently is, but when we were working to keep the access open for across from Gander and the truck stop, the feds in the state were talking about a redo of the exchange there, in changing the access on and off the interstate. And they were talking about, and that's why there was a red X on the pine cone at that point. They were talking about eliminating that property altogether in order to have less of these clover leaves that they now have deemed to be not as safe. So I would want to see us clarify some of that. They put the salt shed across the street. I wasn't very successful in helping to stop that, which would mean the state would kind of like that to be to remain. But they have also talked about how this exchange right now is not even safe during the winter for some of those trucks. So before we would do anything there, I'd like to understand what the long-term plan is for that exchange.
Yeah, what's the DOT's plan? And there's the county's involved. Certainly, we got Token Creek Park right there, and we've got Token Creek that runs through that area that will impact any highway improvement program. Certainly, yeah. I mean, it's a very important part. One of the top 2 or 3 entries to the village of DeForest. And I know Michelle is working on that particular issue, but for what it's worth, the pine cone is cleaner than it was 5 years ago, certainly. So it reflects better than it did back then. And there has been some investment from diesel specialists and, even the DOT to improve the look a little bit in that area. All right, so I think what we've got, and this has been a long meeting, but I think what we've got is as we go through this, let me go back to that main map with all the pointers. There it is. I think what we've got is a probably on the Highway V bend, pending further understanding as to what and whether that private investor might make happen. A definite yes on North Main intersection area, a definite yes on Holm Education Center, a definite yes on Northeast and North Downtown Railroad, all as part of one larger redevelopment area that would be focused on the center part of the community. So I think we're at probably, possibly 2 redevelopment areas with that. A definite yes on the Carroll area, probably on the main or the Market Street corridor. So that's 4, and a definite yes on the DeForest Plaza area. So that's probably 5. So that fits, well within our scope. And I think it's, if we were to identify 11 areas, I think we would, the whole process would crumple on it under its own weight, anyway. So, I think that's a good number. Any reaction to that? Is that
Okay.
an accurate read?
Doug, it looks like you're the remaining person on the line.
It's all on me now, huh?
It's all on you.
I say we go for it. No, actually, I agree. It sounds good. Especially, of course, number 4,
Yeah.
that whole area.
So maybe what I'll do for CEA meeting is we can share maybe this map as our kind of working map. I'll maybe mark it up as here's where we started, and then quickly, and then I'll kind of redo this type of presentation again for just the 5 that we think are the prominent ones, and have a map for each of the 5. Maybe it's one of these other maps that I have exactly, but maybe it's for the L shaped, I'll just use a bigger scale.
Yeah.
Is that, Michelle, what do you think?
I might even suggest just doing the ones we came down to
Okay.
and not doing the other ones. The only reason I say that is because I can see us debating it all over again at the CDA meeting. I don't want to do that. I don't, I just want to try to get away from that. So I would.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can have this in the bullpen in case people say, well, did you look at any other sites, or what, what about this one? And then we can say, yeah, we did think about it, and here's the reasons why it didn't rise to the top. That's great, Michelle. That makes perfect sense.
Okay. And what else do we have do we have anything else on the agenda that we needed to do? Oh, talk about like how we want to do the meetings going forward. But so Doug has control of the meetings going forward. No, we can talk about that another time, but how often Mark and Doug, obviously I didn't schedule enough time for this one, so it's got to be about an hour and a half.
Yeah, I think so. Sorry about that for going
No,
long.
I think it's great. I think this was a great discussion, so I just need to budget more time for that. So sorry, my apologies.
My only thoughts are, if we did monthly meetings, it seems like nothing ever gets done, because it's another 30 days before something gets brought up again. And I almost feel like if we're going to get moving on some of this stuff, maybe we need to meet, twice a month, at least to start, or on an as needed basis to get things rolling.
I'm good with that. We could have them, and Friday morning for me is like ideal, if we could keep it on Friday morning, and but I can certainly arrange, but I think having a regular every other week meeting on our calendar is great. And if it's not necessary one time, we can cancel it.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So every other Friday morning, like same time frame?
Yep.
Okay. I like that. All right. Mark, do you want to kind of get together? I'm putting together the CDA agenda for this weekend for Thursday.
Yeah. When do you want to get the agenda out, Michelle?
I probably want to get it out. I mean, I'd love to get it out Monday night, but I don't think that's going to happen. So Tuesday morning would be great.
Yeah. So I can pull what we just described together either, today yet, or definitely on Monday.
Okay. And maybe we can connect Monday afternoon or something.
Sure.
Okay. Great. I think this was a really great start.
Great. Well, good. Thanks for everyone. The two of you, your remaining participants.
Jane just called. I saw she just texted that she lost internet and then she just called. But so I didn't get it fast enough. But yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye now.